Welcome to our show. This is our 203rd episode. And today we're going to be talking about those four-letter words that you really don't want to be saying at IEP meetings. And then there are some four-letter words that, as an advocate, I suggest you not use at IEP meetings. So what are your guesses? Someone in our comments the other day had suggested the word wait as a four-letter word, which I thought was really interesting, right? Because that's what parents don't want to hear from school staff. Oh, just wait. Things will be better. Oh, just wait. We're going to try this first. And so from a parent's perspective, what do you think are some four-letter words that we don't really want to be saying? Oh, Anita, she is a trailblazer, and she knows. We don't want to be saying that word, right? That W word. Thank you, Anita. I hope your daughter's doing better. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a little game that's called Pick a Door. Okay, so let me bring that up. And while I'm bringing that up, I could also introduce myself. I'm Charmaine Tanner. I have an adult son, Dylan, who's 32 with Down syndrome. I've been a special ed teacher, general ed teacher. I've also been an advocate after I retired from teaching. So I love being here with you guys. And I also wrote this handy dandy guide for parents called The Art of Advocacy, a parent's guide to a collaborative IEP process, and we'll be giving away a copy. So make lots of comments. Yeah, look at Anita, that trailblazer. Use need, not want. And I don't know why it seems like my the comments are so much smaller now. But anyway, let's go on and let me find our little game we're going to play just to kind of brighten things up here. So if you are live with us, howdy, howdy. If you're watching the replay, welcome, welcome. Also, now I need somebody to give me a color of one of these doors that we can see. What is that four-letter word behind the door? So Anita, I know you're actively watching here, and we have some other people with us live. What color? What color? Orange. Okay, so let's cross your fingers that all of this works. Oops, look at that. So that's probably the one of those S words that you don't necessarily want to be using at IEP meetings, right? MC says green, so let's go over to green. What's behind door green? Damn. Ooh. Yeah, you probably don't want to use that word either. I think I saw another color. Virginia, how you doing? Purple. Okay, let's see what's behind the purple door. Oh. Yeah, I think just kind of one of those words that we probably know not to use, right? I need another color picker. Hey, Tatum, pick a color out of the colors that are left. We have red, yellow, turquoise, and pink. Tatum, what is our next color? Or someone else chime in. I'm going to go ahead and pick while we're waiting. Behind the pink door, oh, your favorite four-letter word. And I also wanted to give credit to the teacher who made these PowerPoint slides where you can open these doors. So you can find Emma. I'm not sure how to say her name, but she's the amazing teacher on Teachers Pay Teachers website. So what's another color? Oh, we got pink. Okay, so now what other color are we going to do? Which ones are left? Okay, Tatum says red. So I have to go behind the red door. Another S word. No, we probably don't want to use that one at our IEP meetings either. What other doors? Let's see what somebody's green. We got green, yellow. Okay, let's try yellow. Behind the yellow door, the word want. Just like Anita predicted at the beginning of our show, want is a word that you don't necessarily want to be using, and we will talk about what you can use instead. Okie dokie, what are we left with here? Let's see. Oh, the turquoise door. Best. This is another four-letter word that as an advocate, we don't really suggest that parents use it in a certain context at IEP meetings. And we will be talking about all of that right now. So while you are joining us, the other thing I thought would be interesting to find out today is I keep calling them IEP meetings because that's kind of the language that I'm used to. But I know if you're from Texas, you use ARD for admission, review, dismissal. MC in Virginia, up in Massachusetts, what do you guys use for IEP meetings? Anyway, if you're going to an IEP meeting, if you're going to an ARD meeting, if you're going to the meetings that they use, I can't remember in New York what they call them, any of those kind of meetings, we really want to be careful about our word usage. So let me show you here, because this makes a difference when we are advocating. So let me see if I can pull down. I don't know where Virginia's purple is. That's okay. So I think because some of you are trailblazers, right, and leaders, how do you explain to a parent about why they shouldn't say what at IEP meetings? So I'd like to see your reasons. Why do you think we would say don't use the want? Lisa, I wish I was in Massachusetts instead of Texas. Virginia says, oh, that's right, Connecticut. Here we use PPT meeting. Okay, yeah. So MC, so MC says they use IEP in Massachusetts. Cool. So why do we not want to say the word want in IEP meetings? Because the law doesn't care what you want. It only cares about what your child needs. So here's my advocacy tip here, because the needs section is, as we know, one of those very important sections in the IEP. And the needs section is a great opportunity to infuse inclusion. So let's look at this. Instead of saying the student needs to be able to answer questions after listening to a story, we could infuse inclusion and we could say Jacob needs to be able to answer questions after listening to a story in his second grade classroom. So again, what we want to look at is not saying want, because so many times what will happen is the school district will be very quick to kind of pounce on that and remind parents that it's not about what the parents want. the school has an obligation to provide what the child needs. And so sometimes we think of needs as being kind of a bad word. And yes, I'm all for strengths-based IEPs. However, we can reclaim that label of needs. And instead of seeing it as a negative, we could talk about what your child needs in order to be successful in inclusive classrooms. And we can start making that case for inclusive classrooms right at the needs section of the IEP. So let me know what you think. And also it would be cool to know, how are needs worded on your IEP? Anita says, want us a preference and we need to meet the student's needs. Exactly. Hi, Lisa. And she says, want is negotiable and deniable. Need is not. Oh, I love that. Yeah, see, I could see that on a t-shirt. And MC says, it's not what you want. Yes, and look at this. It's what is appropriate for the student. And we're going to be talking about that word appropriate. And I have a surprise guest for us that's going to appear virtually when we talk about that word appropriate. So let's go back here. So go ahead and use the word needs. It's not a bad word, but infuse inclusion into all your need statements. So that's my tip. Now, why don't you want to use the word best at an IEP meeting? So chime in the comments. Why would I say, you want to stay away from that word best? So let me see what you think. And I was just thinking about this when this morning, and I was remembering, and I haven't heard it in a while, but back in my day when I was teaching, it was very common for parents to hear, the school district doesn't have to give you a Cadillac. All we have to do is give you a Chevrolet or something. It's like poor Chevrolet. And that was referring to, we don't have to do the best. We just have to kind of give you the minimum here. And so let me know too in the comments, do you still hear that? I haven't heard that in a long time. So I don't know if districts are using we don't have to give you a Tesla. We just have to give you a Chevrolet. But Angela is here, and let me grab your comments. Yeah, she said it needs to be appropriate, not best, right? And Anita says, yeah, best is also subjective. You need evidence-based programs. Yep. MC, again, it's appropriate. Exactly. So what we're going to do is look a minute at, what does that appropriate word mean to you as far as in a free, appropriate public education? So if you had to define appropriate, oops, I don't have my PowerPoint showing. If you had to define the word appropriate, what would you say? Oh, interesting, Lisa. She says, yes, sadly, Texas still adheres to the Chevy principle. Huh. Well, it's not only important to know how you define appropriate for your child, but the other thing that we want to know is, how does your school define the word appropriate when it comes to FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. MC says it's going to be a variation according to what the student needs, what the student's needs are. That's the ally for individual in the word in IEP. Yeah, and that's what I think sometimes we often forget is that I word in IEP, right? It's supposed to be individualized. And we have Jean here, and she says, an education in which my child can be successful and accessible. Yeah, I love that. That's a good S word to use, right? Successful, and look at that good A word, accessible. Lisa says, as making progress to be college, career, or life ready. Yeah, because not only are our kids' IEPs there to help them access general ed curriculum, but IEPs are there to help our kids reach that future that not only we hold as a vision for them, but the vision that they hold for themselves. So all of that is so important. And with our special virtual guests here in a couple minutes, you'll be really interested to hear the more discussion from a legal aspect about appropriate. Yeah, MC says the I in IEP. Yes, you are right. So let's go and make sure I'm sharing this. So this is our surprise guest. I think you'll enjoy this. This is from a, I guess I could be on screen too. This is from a live I did in April of 2020. So if you think back on April 2020, that was kind of the height of pretty much all kids across the country being educated or being at home and supposed to be educated, during the pandemic. So I have a special guest. What I did is I took a 6-minute clip from that interview. And if you get my weekly emails, you'll be getting the link to the whole interview with this person. So, and yeah, I think we'll just let the video introduce our surprise guest. So cross your fingers. Let's go back to March 2017. And that was a historic time in the field of education, and specifically special education for families and for students, because that's when we had a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court in the Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District. And it was amazing to see that parents actually can prevail, and to have parents prevail at the United States Supreme Court level was very, very exciting. And like I said, a historic moment. So we are lucky today because we have the attorney, Mr. Jack Robinson, who represented Andrew F. and his parents in that case. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that case, but then also look at how things apply to now in this kind of COVID-19 schooling at home circumstance, right? So I want to bring on our guest, Mr. Jack Robinson, and he resides in Colorado, which is where I used to live for decades. And Jack, we appreciate you being here today. So thank you and welcome.
Sure, glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Charmaine. Free appropriate public education. So that is what's required by a school district to provide for a child with a disability. What was in flux for, 35 plus years since the IDEA was enacted was, what is an appropriate education? What's an appropriate public education? Free is, that's easy to understand. Education can be a slippery slope as to what is education, academics, behavioral functioning, that type of thing. But, what is an appropriate education? What is a school district required to provide a student to satisfy the requirements and the purposes of the IDEA. Children with disabilities are entitled to more educational benefit than merely more than de minimis. And Supreme Court, it's time for you to, address head on, what does that mean? The chances of having the U.S. Supreme Court take any case, let alone a special education case, is slim to none, less than 1%. And they took this case, and they thought the fact pattern for this case was, a good case to establish finally establish a standard for a free appropriate public education. And that's what they did, as you said, in March 22nd, 2017. And they issued a decision saying that rejecting, that was our main goal in this, was to have rejected that merely more than de minimis standard, which the Supreme Court did very soundly, saying this merely more than de minimis standard doesn't provide an education to a child with a disability at all. So merely more than de minimis standard was rejected, and they established what they said they called markedly more demanding standard, that a school district is required to develop an IEP that's reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of his or her sort of unique circumstances. And what that means is for children who have the ability to achieve a grade level, to advance from grade to grade, but do have learning disabilities or other disabilities, that it requires a plan that enables them to achieve to that potential, that they can master core standards and advance from grade to grade, just like every other child, just like every general education child. So in my estimation, that is equal opportunity, that you have to be able to educate these kids. And those are the vast majority of children on IEPs. And for that smaller population, sort of like Drew, who does not have, say, the ability to achieve at grade level, the IEP still needs to provide a FAPE, and that has challenging objectives. I want to emphasize too here the notion that's in the Supreme Court case is that the IEP is not the sum and substance of a child's education, right? The IEP is a plan to enable that child through accommodations or modifications, special education and related services, to enable the child to access education with a capital E. But school districts do, and I think parents get lulled into this too, thinking that, all right, the IEP is the FAPE. IEP is the appropriate education. I mean, the IEP still needs to ensure that a child is making appropriate progress in social studies, and science, and
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And I think I need to remind myself of that, because I think, like you said, so many times we look at this is, what we need to, be looking at for language and, making sure it's worded specifically and everything. But this is one slice of their education picture, right? And they do, the whole point is that they're going to have access to general ed curriculum. And so, yeah, I think that's an excellent point for us to remember.
Andrew F. standard is the standard that's in place regardless of whether the school doors are open or whether we're distance learning or whatever.
So then the rest of that interview that I did in April 2020 with Jack Robinson, the attorney for Andrew F. in that Supreme Court case, the rest of that interview talks about what does appropriate look like with pandemic circumstances. So I know for some of you that still is applying as far as your child might not be back in school. And so, like I said, if you get, and let me put that here, if you get my weekly emails with advocacy tips, I'll have the link to that full interview with Jack Robinson and that comes out tomorrow morning. So check your email box tomorrow morning. If you're not signed up, go to this link and you can get signed up. So we have some time left. I just think that Jack made some very key points in there as far as we need to make sure we hold schools accountable for high expectations for our kids and ensure that they get the services and supports to meet those high expectations. Before the bar was so low, the school really didn't have to do much in many states to say that they were providing an appropriate education. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And then also in the beginning of that interview with Jack, there's some background history of how we got to Andrew, that decision versus the Raleigh decision and some of the other circuit court decisions. So if you're into all that kind of stuff, it's a great interview to listen to. And we have time for questions, for conversations. It can be about, not using the word want and instead using the word needs, not using the word best and instead using the word appropriate. And so our floor is open. You can, like I said, respond to what we've been talking about, or if you have other questions on other topics. Angela from Arizona says truth. Yes, indeed, right? Because the other point that Jack made toward the end of that clip that I wanted to also emphasize was that the IEP does not represent that appropriate education. The IEP is one part of your child's appropriate education. And so that's when we talk about having access to general ed curriculum. The IEP is not made to be these standalone goals that aren't connected to what kids are doing in general ed classes. The IEP and those goals are that avenue that help your child get that access and be more successful in general ed. So if that makes sense, we need to make sure that appropriate not only has higher expectations with it, but appropriate is also connected with what your child is learning and how they're participating in the general ed classes. So, and before I forget, I'll just announce it again and then hopefully I'll remember. So make comments, because I'll go through the comments and I'll pick a lucky winner to get my book. This was an Amazon #1 bestseller, The Art of Advocacy, a parent's guide to a collaborative IEP process. So we got to remember to do that, and we've got some comments coming up. And here's Corey, another trailblazer. She said, yes, actual implementation of specially designed instruction, right? It's what a concept. It's it really needs to be happening and not, when your child is pulled out. We have our friend from, let's see, the South Texas Down Syndrome Group. I got on a bit late, but I agree some IEPs have such low standards, and then we wonder why the gap is so big as they progress in their grade levels. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, that whole belief that our kids are competent and that we need to make sure that we're stretching them but providing that scaffolding so they can be successful, because it doesn't have to be a huge gap all the time for our kids, right? Between what they are doing as far as, at an academic level and what other students are doing. we can make sure that we use that specially designed instruction, and it would make a difference if we actually implement things like that. And Anita says, we are embarking on a new quest for home-based instruction as we navigate a new diagnosis. My daughter has non-epileptic seizures triggered by stress. In person at school has proved to be very stressful, and we pulled her out following episode seizures every week, seeking psychiatric treatment. Process to be approved for homebound is another set of hoops to jump through. I know, Anita. And, you know, what is talking about things at a minimum level, homebound instruction can be at such a minimum level. I don't know for Virginia where you are, Anita, and others chime in for what it is in your state. But most often I see kids only being offered like 5 or 6 hours of homebound instruction. And so, I mean, that's to me a pretty low standard for appropriateness. That would be interesting to see, like, have OSEP, the Office of Special Ed Programs in DC, you know, give guidance on that. But yeah, I'm sure there's a whole nother, like you said, set of hoops to jump through, and your physician is going to be your best friend as far as documenting that. But yeah, I feel so. I'm hoping that, you know, with your daughter being at home for a while, that, you know, that will be a more comfortable place for her to be, because all of those seizures are pretty scary, right? Hey, Maggie, she says, good reminder that every child should have access to general ed curriculum. People need to think of IEP as a curb cutout. I love that. It's really just the way that schools should be able to provide access to education for students. It's not the only thing your child should be learning in school. Yeah, I mean, you think of the rich curriculum that happens in general ed classrooms, and not only with core academic subjects, but, you know, making the volcano in science class, and, you know, going on a virtual field trip in social studies class or whatever. But all of those things that happen during the day in a general ed classroom is so much richer than what students could receive in pull-out services. And that's speaking from being a special ed teacher that did pull-out services, that had a self-contained class, and then moved and became an inclusion facilitator, and then became a general ed teacher to include kids. So yeah, we can move away from that model, and our kids just benefit. I think back to the things when our son Dylan was in, you know, like middle school, social studies, science classes, all the things that he learned, it was just like so cool. And it gave him richer vocabulary, richer prior knowledge when he was, you know, working on different projects. So yeah, it's, the IEP is just one little slice of our kids' education. And Abigail, hey there, she says, I agree. Some IEP goals are sometimes very low expectations. And then getting schools to follow the IEP, giving one-to-one or using modified, you know, materials. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the first hurdle is to get a well-written IEP. The next big hurdle is, how do you make sure that IEP gets implemented? And that's a new workshop that I'm working on. So I'll let you know when that's ready. But yeah, I mean, it's great if it's in writing, but if they're not implementing it, I can't talk, with fidelity, then it doesn't really help having that nicely written IEP. Let us know, yes or ramp. And Anita says, yes, one of the options is extremely limited, no special core classes only. Yeah, see, that's, so MC said our second grader on a 504 plan had 4 hours a week at homebound. Yeah, see, that's not even, you know, an hour a week. So I would think more parents are going to be challenging that minimum, you know, practice that school districts have used for years. And I'm sure it's a greater impact now that more of our students, because of the pandemic, you know, aren't able to go to school because of medical and safety reasons, and they do need some kind of supports at home. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. MC says, oh, look at you. You are clever. There's an F word often schools don't want to hear. Fidelity. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's another t-shirt we could have, or mugs. We could have more mugs made. Yeah. And it really takes, I think, a person with training and background to know, one, what needs to be written in an IEP, how the language needs to be specific, how we want it to be strengths-based, how we want inclusion infused throughout the IEP. There's all these specific things, right? And then the service minutes and the least restrictive environment. And I think it's really difficult and challenging for parents to be able to, one, look at their IEP that their child has and see if they think it's well written, or if they have any questions about it, do they ask those questions at IEP meetings? And then one of the biggest things to look at as far as fidelity is to go back and look at what are you getting for progress reports. And we recently had a video about that. Because that's where you want to get the incremental feedback and not wait a whole 9 weeks, not wait a whole trimester before you get an official progress report. And in order to track that fidelity, you have to be able to track the progress monitoring information, and hopefully that includes data. So there's so many different skills that I can see why it's very challenging for families without somebody with a lot of experience doing that, or, you know, an advocate from your local area, whatever. But to have some support to figure out, is the school really implementing this IEP like it's supposed to be? Because that's, I used to have a can of worms. I think I might do, because that is a can of worms. These are gummy worms that are like petrified now. So any other comments? Angie's here. Hey, Angie. She says that her son was allowed into 8th grade English class for the first time. He reads at a 2nd grade level. He loves it. He does not have to keep up. He just needs to access to do what his peers are learning. Exactly. And that, I don't know if you've heard my 8th grade English story for our son Dylan, but he was in 8th grade English general ed, and they were studying Shakespeare. And I was like, I don't know how much Dylan will remember about this. But then it's like, how much do any kids remember about Shakespeare? So he had an introduction to Shakespeare, and it like perked his interest. He loved different parts of some of the plays. But then he went to high school, and it was back to school night in the fall, 9th grade English class. She was talking about her curriculum. Dylan was in the back to school night with us. And the teacher said, and then this quarter, we're going to be, you know, studying Shakespeare. And Dylan like popped up in the back to school night and said, Shakespeare. He's like, To be or not to be? That is the question. And it was like, perfect. And it was like, yeah, Dylan doesn't remember a lot about Shakespeare, but he can quote a few lines, and he can quote a few lines from Romeo and Juliet. And so it was like, boy, if he hadn't had 8th grade English, that would have been hard for him to pick it up in 9th grade. Well, guess what? The story gets better. So Dylan's fully included, throughout his schooling. He decides he wants to go to college. This is back in, what year was it? 2006. He wants to go to college, and we have to figure all that out, but we do. And he starts auditing classes at the University of Colorado in 2007 after he left high school. And one of his classes he took was an acting class. And guess what his assignment was for the acting class? It was to go see the university production of Hamlet and write a review on it. And it was like, who would have thought that 8th grade English class, that 9th grade English class actually helped Dylan in his first college class. So that exposure, like I said, that prior knowledge and just that general information is so helpful. And that comes from being in general ed classes, not sitting in the back of general ed classes, but it comes from actively participating, having supports, natural peer supports, as much as possible, less adult support. And our kids can thrive. So that's a little bit of my soapbox. I need to get a soapbox that I can share here, right? And MC says, yes, that's all she remembers about Shakespeare too. And so Abigail says, this will be number 2, that my daughter's IEP states 1-to-1 across all settings. She's in general ed classes and needs help with fine motor, writing, cutting, etc. Hence the need for the one-on-one, and can be a runner. She does love being with typical peers, and she learns so much from them. See, isn't that important? Yeah, and I think about, some families have had to make the choice of have their kids at home again, at least, now in the fall. And even though they can connect virtually with their classmates, it's, not the same, right, as being there in person. And so I think about how many of students rely on those peer cues to know what to do next, or look at the peer reading and thinking, I can do that too. And all of that, so much of that modeling isn't there now when our kids are at home, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I was so hoping that this fall would be better as far as kids back at school. So Devaney, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. She says, MC, that's the difference between inclusion and integration. Proper support for teachers and students is vital. Yes, yes. And we often forget that support for teachers. So thanks for bringing that up. She said, my son is in 9th grade, doesn't write, and is reading at his 3rd grade level. He also has some mild behavior related to his autism. There's no reason he can't do grade level work with proper accommodations, but without the staff to support in the training in UDL, then it won't work. And that's what, again, is a huge roadblock, is for the staff to have the support and the training to change their practice and embrace more of the universal design for learning framework, embrace co-teaching with others. And sometimes that can be co-teaching with a student in your class. It doesn't always have to be co-teaching with another adult. So we still have a ways to go, right? And I'm sure you've probably heard on other live trainings we've had here on Facebook that I often talk about how training for staff and training for parents can be written in the IEP. That training is provided for not only, or the support is not only for your child, and we write that in various ways throughout the IEP, but there's also support written in IDEA, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice, but from my advocacy advice is, yes, talk about that. It's a tricky subject because a lot of teachers will get defensive if you mention, like, what do you think? Would some additional training or peer coaching help as far as, making you feel more confident and having the child be successful? I haven't figured out the best way to word that yet. And I need to work on that. That needs to be one of my projects because so many teachers do get defensive. And I just wish it wasn't that way because it's not meant to be, pointing your fingers at somebody and saying, nah, you don't know what you're doing. The whole point is we can't know everything there is to know about all the children that we have in our classroom. So it's okay. And there are also a number of teachers that love it when the parents push, let's write training for staff in the IEP, because then the teachers can finally get the support from the principal or the special ed director, whoever, to get the support and the training that they need. The other point about training is one-time workshops aren't going to be enough. In order to really change the culture, change the practice, you need peer coaching as a component of staff training so they really implement it. So back to that F word, fidelity. I think that's my favorite F word now. I had a different F word I used a lot in college. I bet you can guess what it was. So Rosanna says, with COVID, you can't really observe to see what's going on if they are including any ways around this. Yeah, and so I think going and seeing for yourself is going to be your best source of information, right? And because of COVID, they're not using volunteers and allowing parents in. And, you could argue that, but I think because of health concerns, you don't really want to argue that. And so instead, you can ask, the staff to, get short videos of your child doing an activity and send that to you. Take photos of samples of a project they're working on with a classmate. So try to, observation is like your best visual, but since we can't get that now, let's look at how else can we get visual information. And that's through videos, that's through images. We can get auditory information. They can record just using their cell phone, your child reading a story and send that to you. So yeah, it's tricky. And so what we need is, I'll post this sometime in my Facebook group, and we can ask other people, and you guys that are here with us live, how are you getting meaningful information about what inclusion really looks like and how your child's being included when you can't actually be at school? Yeah, and MC says maybe ask for examples. And Jeannie says our child has an IEP and is in special education in a special education school. His IEP states one-on-one as well as a scribe. The school is refusing and wants to discuss when to implement during the day, even though the IEP says throughout the day. This IEP was created to allow our son to access his education. So, Jeannie, one question I would have is, did this school that he's at, did the staff at the school write the IEP, or was this an IEP that like transferred in with him? Because there's different, kind of procedures that you have to use. If it was an IEP that he brought with him from, like a different school setting, then the new school has a couple options. They can read the IEP at an IEP team meeting, and they can review it and decide whether or not they want to just accept it as a whole IEP and continue on. Or the receiving school can also at an IEP meeting, which you were at, discuss the IEPs transferring with, and typically they'll want to at least amend some things. So one, Jeannie, is to see did he transfer in with an IEP? Did the school accept it, or did they change it? And if it's an IEP that the school accepted or that they themselves wrote and they're still not, following what it says, you can try a couple different things. One, bring in an advocate. That can help. Two, you can ask, most states have facilitated IEP meetings where you can ask for a facilitator and it doesn't cost parents or schools anything, and the State Department of Education in your state can help you do that. So having a facilitator at an IEP meeting, and while you're talking about, remember, this is what the IEP says, this is what's happening, and we got to connect the dots here. You could also ask for mediation. That can be a helpful thing. Again, the mediator will be provided, doesn't cost you anything, doesn't cost the school anything. You have usually a few hours of discussion. If you come to agreements, it's written as an agreement that you and the school would sign, becomes legally binding. So you could bring an advocate, you can ask for facilitated IEP, you could ask for mediation, you could file a state complaint and show that the district is not providing your child FAPE because they're not implementing the IEP with fidelity. You could go to a very expensive, very emotional time of asking, filing for due process. So there's a whole gamut of options. And yeah, you just need to look at your specific situation. I do offer parents that I'm not working with right now a free 30-minute phone consultation. So if you would be interested in that, just let me know and I can give you the link to sign up for a free phone call. Susan, hey Susan, she says, my school doesn't believe in training or collaboration time in the IEP. They say training and scheduling is a building decision. So yeah, I would, kind of give them a friendly reminder of what the regulations say for IDEA. And sometimes just quoting that isn't going to get them to change their mind, like, so what? But that can be a starting place to be able to say, actually, this is something that the IEP team needs to consider. It is one of the components of an IEP that the IEP team has, this decision-making ability. Yeah, and, and I don't know, Susan, exactly, what your you know, what your relationships are with, you know, the staff and everything, because that can make a difference, right? Because sometimes there's like a backdoor that you can use. And if you have like an ally inside the school district that can help, it's like if you talk to maybe the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, maybe that person would be an ally that would say, yes, you know, we think, you know, universal design for learning is a district priority, and we're going to be, you know, focusing on that for the next few years as our professional development, you know, focus. So yeah, you know, the goal is to have teachers trained and be able to help our kids be successful. So what are the ways we can do that? We can have it written in the IEP. If that doesn't seem like it's possible and you don't really want to go further up the ladder of resolving that, then look through, you know, another doorway, another window of how can we reach this goal. Sometimes it's starting with a small group of teachers that have a book club and parents are invited to come, you know, and it'd probably be virtual, right? But there just can be some inroads to helping staff realize that there's other ways of doing things. You know, there's all kinds of people like Paula Kluth and Julie Costin and such that can come to districts and provide professional development. So yeah, it's, you know, and as I pretty much say every Thursday, what we accept continues. So if we are going to accept you know, the district's position that that's not an IEP decision, that's a building decision, then that's what's going to happen, right? So I know it's not easy. There are so many things, right? Karen from Colorado, she said, we've talked about making videos of my kiddos since I can't see and really have no idea what his school day looks like. Good. Yeah, and I think that's excellent. And you know, sometimes schools will say, oh, we can't do a video because we can't show any of the students in the class. And they'll use like, oh, privacy. But there's a whole lot of information and guidance from OSEP and other places that, yes, in fact, you know, you can, like just when you're observing in the classroom, you're going to see other kids, right? So, and that's okay. There's really no expectation of privacy when you're in a school building, in a school classroom. But yeah, videos are like gold, right? Because you can see how long it's taking your child to do it. You can see who their, you know, friends are if they're doing a small group activity. You can play it back when your child comes home from school and you can say, look, you guys were, you know, working at the math center today or whatever. And so it not only becomes a way for you to see what's happening at school, but those videos can be so gold because they can also help you have conversations with your kids, you know, when they come home from school. Because most of us have had our kids be, you know, like when we ask them, what'd you do at school today? I don't know, you know. So videos are golden. And now, like with cell phones, it's like so easy to do, right? We like it. And actually, you could write that in your IEP for progress monitoring, and they could do videos every week. So Rosanna says, is requesting video something that has to be discussed in the IEP, or can I just request it from the teacher? You can just request it, but if you really want to make sure it happens, then it needs to be written in the IEP. And you can be like best friends with the teacher, and you know, all the time she's doing it, and then she gets transferred to another building or something, and you have the new teacher, and the new teacher doesn't want to do that. Well, if it was in the IEP, the new teacher wouldn't have a choice, right? She has to follow the IEP. So even when things are going really well at your school and you're like, oh, I hate to be that parent. And so I'll just let it go. And it's really okay. You don't know if that staff person is going to be there the whole year. I know, Karen, you had that experience last year when I think it was in January, you had a teacher change. So, you know, because I'm an advocate, I always kind of lean towards make your requests in writing, respond in writing, make sure it's written in the IEP. So you could ask for the IEP to be amended. The whole IEP team doesn't necessarily have to be there when you're making small changes. But yeah, so if you want them to be accountable, it's got to be in the IEP, right? Right. Oh, shoot. MC says, our school district filed due process against us. Very stressful experience, top 5 in my life so far. I bet. We filed for due process when Dylan was 3, and luckily we were able to settle at mediation, but it is. And I mean, my husband and I were special ed teachers, and, you know, but yeah, you do what you have to do, but due process it can be a very expensive process because I think, pretty much always need an attorney. There are some parents that represent themselves. To me, that makes it even more stressful. But yeah. And interesting fact, when I was a special ed teacher, one of my last years, being a special ed teacher, a parent of one of my students filed due process against us. And so I went through due process as a special ed teacher. And that is a whole nother story, but it was a great learning experience for me. And it helped me grow. More info, please. How can they do this? Did you win? Yeah, Rosanna, if you want, like I said, you can book a free half-hour phone call with me and we can kind of go into more details and then look if it like applies to your situation. MC says, I live in Massachusetts. Yes, school districts can file against a parent. In our case, it was over eligibility and vote stay put. Oh, so you can even Google it and find their decision. Cool. Rosanna, can you repeat what you said in response to their statement? Where is there a law that states it can be done? So are you referring to, Rosanna, when I was saying like show in the state or IDEA regulations that training can be written in the IEP? Is that what you're talking about, the training topic? What I'll do is I'll put that link in the email. And I don't know, Rosanna, if you are getting, do you get my weekly emails? If not, sign up here because I'll put the regulation in there that talks about teacher or parent training being written in the IEP. And I send that out on Friday morning. Yes, love that advice about putting it in writing. Karen says, oh my gosh, we sure did have that experience last year. LOL. We're trying really hard to implement change while remaining friendly. LOL. Yeah, it's a fine line because you do want to have good, positive relationships with staff. And then, you know, as a parent, you got to do what's right for your child, right? But as much as we can do it as a collaborative process. So let me pick the winner now because otherwise I get to the end and we forget. Okie dokie. So what I do is I close my eyes and I scroll through the comments and I pick one person to win a copy of my Art of Advocacy book. So I'm scrolling through the comments and I'm going to stop. And, oh, cool. So tell me how to say your name. Is it Devaney? Devaney, if you send me a message, then I can get your mailing address and have a copy of my book mailed to you. Love it. Yes, don't we like it when we have winners? And I didn't forget it this time. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, let's go back and see. I think we have some more questions or comments. Angie says, I'm driving. It won't let me turn the volume up, so I wanted to listen. We'll have to catch the replay. Yeah, and if you know other people that this topic is really important for them to hear, you can, hit that SHARE button and share it with other people. Anita says, inclusion has two eyes. Look at you. You are so good. I love this. Use your own two eyes to see how the school is pulling the wool over your eyes to give the illusion of inclusion. Yeah, and that's right. I could go on for a very long time about that. But we'll go back to your comments. We are part-time enrolled in Seattle Public School in kindergarten for IEP services at the school my child was assigned. We will be going to school to receive those services for about 1 to 2 hours each day, except Wednesday because of my work schedule. How do I advocate for the accommodation of those minutes to the other days? So when you say that you're enrolled part-time, does that mean that you're only enrolled 1 or 2 hours a day, or you're enrolled half day, but because of maybe, health or safety, your child's only going to school 1 or 2 hours? So I would need a little bit more information. So again, you can let me know in the comments and I can give you more. I want to make sure that I'm answering it for your specific situation. And let's see if I have any more comments here that we haven't said. Oh, Devaney says, I email teachers and ask for examples of how my son is included. I also share a positive student profile where I share things that have worked in the past. And that's huge. And those profiles can be so helpful because they're usually short and sweet, like a one-pager, and can be shared with all the people in the building, like the music teacher, the PE teacher, right? Those people need to know about your child also. And then throughout the year, you can send friendly reminders because teachers are busy and they have lots of kids. And so it's just kind of a nice reminder to use that profile. Like, maybe every time you get a progress report, you send the profile, and that's a way for you to remind the staff, like, these are things that work, these are things that don't work. That kind of information. So yeah, I think what we just have to do is share it more often with people. Rosanna says, is requesting video something that has to be discussed in the IEP? Yeah, and we talked about that. It's good to do. So mediation is done when? Well, usually if there's been, several IEP meetings and you haven't been able to come to consensus. And sometimes it's like you have agreement on parts of the IEP, but there's other parts of the IEP that you disagree with. And so if the district has made their final offer to you in the form of an IEP, and you still disagree, then that's when you have choices. You can ask for the facilitator. You could request mediation. In both of those processes, you can find information if you go to your State Department of Special Education website, and usually they have a tab for dispute resolution, and that's where they have the forms. They usually have pamphlets and information that you can also get info from. If you're working with an advocate, the advocate can explain to you, you know, what the process is and kind of when you do this step and what you do for the next step. So yeah, but you can ask for mediation whenever there's disagreement and, you know, talking more at the table isn't working. Let's see. And, oh, MC, when the school district filed due process against her, she said, I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I did it myself in my village. Yeah, and that can be, I can see why that would be really stressful. Lisa says, Devaney, so awesome to have you here and glad you found Charmaine. She's been a godsend, a lot of great sound advice. Thanks, Lisa. And Lisa is also one of our trailblazers. And MC says, yes, Devaney, you could send me a message through Facebook Messenger and I can get your mailing address because you are the lucky winner today. So we have been having some great conversations and I love Thursdays. I look forward to Thursdays because I just feel like we are each other's village here on Facebook, right? And I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the experiences. I share what I know. And I can find out when I don't know something, but look at all the comments that we had today and look at all the ideas that you can walk away with, not just from suggestions that I've made, but from your fellow parents. So I so appreciate you being here. Come back next Thursday. We're here every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. I am Charmaine Tanner, and my passion is to help parents become even more effective advocates so your kids can be safe, happy, and learning every day in the general ed classroom. So until next Thursday, we will see you then, and I am